Howdy, everybody. It's Monday, Columbus Day. We'll have to reevaluate Columbus. He was not a good guy, folks. They're going to get rid of it, I hope. Columbus, the history we were force-fed in high school, grammar school, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. No, he came. He never made it to America, by the way. He made it as far as the West Indies, and he thought it was America. And he came here to steal spices and gold, whatever else they could get, and to enslave the Native Americans. Not a good guy. So they're rewriting history on that. They'll probably take him off the books eventually. They've been removing statues lately. Not the greatest guy. Anyway, how was your weekend? I just got done with a bike ride, so I'm in my bike outfit. So sorry about my appearance. I know I look like a hobo. Someone told me, you look like a hobo. Really? No. You guys even know what a hobo is? A homeless person to your generation. Anyway, today I want to talk about the auteur theory of filmmaking and what it all means, how it relates to some of the greatest cinema in our history of cinema. And there's always been, it's a French word for meaning the author of their own works. Most major Hollywood movies are made by factories. There's producers, writers, set designers, musicians, technicians, and then there's the director over here who they hire to kind of oversee all that with some sort of artistic vision. Well, some directors had a really strong artistic vision, and the French called them auteurs. And they usually, a lot of times, they wrote their own scripts and directed, and then they had a visual stamp that they put on it. You spot their movies just through their the visual language they were using. And a couple I want to talk about today. There's been many auteurs, but the ones I want to talk about, we're still in the 50s right now, not quite getting to the 60s yet. We're getting there. But I would say the three major auteurs in American films. Now, I'm not talking about foreign films yet. I'm going to talk about that on the next, on Wednesday. So be prepared for that. Would be Alfred Hitchcock, Billy Wilder, and Elia Kazan. Now, what do they all have in common? If you do some research, you'll find out, because you're going to watch some documentaries about each one of them, or as many as you can squeeze in. I'll post those on Canvas later on today. They're all, none of them are born in America. Hitchcock is British. Wilder is from Austria. He escaped Nazi Germany because he was a Jew and he had to get out, or he's going to go to a concentration camp. And Elia Kazan is Turkish Greek, and he was he came to this country too as an immigrant. These are all immigrants, folks, and they made pretty good in America. And so their physical stamp on their movies is even more powerful because it's coming from a foreign outlook or basis. And so Hitchcock was very, very British, and his movies are mostly, a lot of them are suspense. You would call them suspense, mysteries, suspense. That was his forte. That was his, that's the genre he worked in exclusively. He even had a television show in the 50s and early 60s called the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. He was just the host mostly, but it was little vignette, 30-minute macabre episodes of people doing some dark things. Anyway, so let me talk about Hitchcock just for a moment. He started directing in the silent era, and so that's in the 20s, folks, as you well know. And then he directed many British films in the 30s, and some very famous ones that became his calling card to America. But he did The Lady Vanishes, about a woman who's traveling across the continent on a train. Folks, before airplane travel was so quick and popular, people traveled by trains. And so this is a good train movie. Woman befriends another woman on the train, and one woman goes missing, and nobody believes this woman when she says to people that this other woman is missing, because there's some spies that grabbed her, but no one believes her except for one man who's kind of fancies her, and he helps her out a bit. So it's got a lot of typical Hitchcock um, uh, trademarks, which is he'll make a suspenseful movie, so there's some danger going on, absolutely, but also there's some humor going on and some romance. He throws it all in, and he knows how to weave it all together to a really entertaining story. And that's one of my favorite Hitchcock movies of that era. You can watch it on. If you guys should get Criterion, you have to pay $10 a month for it, but it shows all the classics and foreign films and a lot of silent films and new films too. Anyway, but it's for the serious cinephile. That's where I see most of this stuff. But I've seen this stuff for years because I've been studying it for years. But it's out there. It's out there in the world. You can watch it on one of your streaming channels. They're always highly entertaining, very fast-paced, witty dialogue. The acting is always very uh, witty and smart. Um, Played by witty and smart British actors. Anyway, who seem to be able to pull that sort of thing off better, I think, than a lot of American actors. So Hitchcock, but then he made the 39 Steps, which is another similar type of thriller, spy. Nazis are coming for people, and this couple, they're trying to discover the secrets to the 39 Steps, and so there's a mystery, and there's also some humorous dialogue and witty repartee between the lead actor and the lead actress. And hopefully they're going to save the day. So he was pretty well known. So they wanted him to come to America. Now, World War II is starting to take its toll in England. They're bombing London every day. So film production is definitely not on. And so he decides to come to America. And then he got here and immediately started directing films that became very famous very quick, and using his same sort of stamp, as you were, his same auteur look on things. His films looked a certain way because he would have them photographed a certain way. His films sounded a certain way. He controlled it all, and it was his stamp, his personal stamp on it. And that made it very recognizable as a Hitchcock film. And his films always did well on the box office. He was always well thought of in the industry. He wasn't a rebel. He knew how to bring a movie in on budget and please the people and please himself. And he put himself in each movie. It's a famous thing where he'd have a walk-on cameo, no dialogue, but he'd be getting in a cab or getting on a bus or getting on a train or walking by in a restaurant. And it became kind of a fun deal to try to spot Hitchcock's cameo, as they call them. And that was his way of winking at the audience. So there was a playfulness to these films, even though some of them were rather grim. And later on, he made some very, very famous, I guess, gruesome films. Psycho is one of them. 1960. Maybe you've heard about that movie. Maybe you've seen the famous shower sequence where Janet Leigh's in the shower and she is killed by psychotic Anthony Perkins with a big knife. And like Jaws in the 70s, where people were terrified to go into the ocean because the great white was going to grab them, people became very afraid of going into the shower. Think about it, folks. You're in the shower. How vulnerable are you in the shower? You're naked for one, and you're scrubbing, dubbing, and you're not thinking about somebody coming to hack you to death. Usually, you're not thinking that, but people start thinking that. And to this day, people could get creeped out in the shower. And there's a lot of movies that we see where the camera starts coming towards the shower curtain, and you're going, "Oh no, no, don't open it," because you know something bad's going to be in there. Sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. That all stems from Psycho, and Hitchcock could tap into that primordial fear that we all have about being vulnerable. And you're pretty vulnerable when you're in a shower. You're not in there protected by your clothes, for one, and you're not protected by the locked door because anybody can get in. If you're in the shower, you can't hear them, right? And so a lot of creepy things have happened in the shower because of Psycho. And so it's a classic. It's not one of my favorite Hitchcock movies, but it's probably his most popular, well-known one. But in the 50s, he made a slew of really innovative, sharp adult films. When I say adult, these aren't silly films. These aren't Adam Sandler films. They're for adults. They're adult content. They're usually around a mystery, sometimes a murder mystery, and usually a lot of times there's a couple who meet and they're going to solve this mystery. And of course, in the meantime, they're falling in love. He did this over and over again, and he made some incredible films in the 50s. That's where I want to focus on right now because I'm still in the 50s from last 2 weeks ago, whatever. And so his famous movies of the 50s would be so many of them, but his most famous ones, my favorite movie of all time is Rear Window, whereas James Stewart is the everyman. He usually has somebody who plays kind of like an ordinary, and he's a photographer. And the whole movie takes place in, I would say the whole thing takes place in his apartment. But he's looking out into the courtyard where he can see other windows from other apartments, and he's got his telephoto lens, and he's essentially, I'm not kidding, folks, he's a peeping Tom, let's face it. And he's looking in at their lives. He's laid up in this wheelchair, so he can't get out, he can't work, he can't go about his daily business. He has a really hot girlfriend that comes in and literally throws herself at him, Grace Kelly, and he doesn't want to marry her for some reason because he's the wandering type of guy. He's got to wander, and he's a world traveler, and he's like a work correspondent photographer, and she's willing to accept all that, but she's literally throwing himself. Grace Kelly, one of the most beautiful blondes to ever come down the pike, and then his comic relief housekeeper, Thelma Louise, is always there for good comic relief. Thelma Louise played, that's all she ever did was play maids, and did a great career out of it. She's a real character actress. Anyway, so he's looking out the window, and he's watching this couple across the way. Well, he thinks he sees a murder. Did he? I don't know. Maybe he did. And so, but he can't get out to investigate. So guess what? He sends his girlfriend down there to investigate. And she gets in trouble because there was a murder. And then the guy comes looking for him because he knows he's been spied upon. And so it's a real tense thriller. You don't know if the murder is going to get them both and who's going to win because he can't get out of the chair. His leg is literally cast up to his waist. He is literally immobile. And Thelma Ritter, I said Thelma Louise. What am I? Her name was Thelma Ritter, the character actress. She was in the Misfits too, played similar character. Doris Day movies, she played a similar character. The trusty sidekick, humorous comic relief. Usually that's what she played. Anyway, so it's got a lot of Hitchcock trademarks. Um, the thriller, the couple, witty banter. Um, he also made another one, James Stewart, called Vertigo, which has recently replaced Citizen Kane as the best movie ever made on the AFI list. I would dispute that personally. But Vertigo is about a guy who becomes obsessed with a woman, and he starts stalking her all over San Francisco, follows her everywhere, and she suddenly supposedly dies, and he's heartbroken. And then he sees a woman who looks exactly like the dead woman, and he starts to know her, and he starts to make her dress like the dead woman. He makes her get a new haircut, makes her dress a certain way. Well, folks, without giving too much away, spoiler alert, she is the dead woman. That was all faked. You have to watch the movie for that. It's actually the same woman, and Kim Novak, and he's obsessed with her, and it doesn't end well for anybody. And it's called Vertigo because he has a terror of heights, any height, even a stepladder. If you have vertigo, you know what I'm talking about. And so that's another typical Hitchcock movie where he uses his wit, his camera, the romance that it's not going to quite work out. But he also did a really intriguing movie called Rope, and about two college students who commit what they think is the perfect murder. James Stewart's in that one also. He plays their professor, and the whole thing takes place in a single room and at a party. And it's not boring at all, folks. It's very intriguing. So Hitchcock was having quite a 10-year period. And there's some others in there. I'm not going to toss that out yet because it's too much. I want to move on. But his personal stamp is so strong, you don't need to see the credits to know that it's a Hitchcock movie. You can tell by the music. He used the same composer, Bernard Herrmann, for many, many of his movies. And you know, as soon as you hear it, you know it's a Hitchcock theme. And then as soon as you start to see the photography, the camera setups, how they're framed, what the actors are doing, the storyline, usually about obsessive, compulsive people who are in for a very thrilling time of their lives, usually for the worst. And one of his other movies, one of my favorites, was called North by Northwest, came out in 1959. Maybe you've seen the famous shot of Cary Grant running in the cornfields as he's being strafed by an airplane who's trying to kill him. I'll show you some of these. You'll have to look at some of these things on YouTube. I'll post them, and once I find them, I'll post them on Canvas for you. Okay, so that's Hitchcock. He lived a long life. He lived until early 80s, and by the time he died, he was long out of fashion. But his heyday was the 50s and early 60s. His last, probably hugely successful movie was called The Birds. Maybe you've seen it. That's about 1964 or 5 in there. And the birds attack people. You know, don't go outside because the birds will get you. Of course, what do people do? They go outside. Just stay in. The birds won't get you. But you go outside, the birds are going to get you. Anyway, so but it's to me, it's kind of a hokey movie, simplistic. But same ingredients. The handsome guy, Rod Taylor, the Tippi Hedren, the cold blonde, and they're going to be a romance there in amongst all the tragedy, the birds killing people, pecking at their eyes and stuff. Anyway, so the auteur, Elie Kazan, was an immigrant came to this country, worked his way up through the theater system in the 1930s in New York City. He was a technical guy in the theater. They called him Gadge because he meaning short for gadget. He could fix anything. He could fix anything, and so that was his nickname. And he worked his way up and started as an actor, and then he started directing theater. He was in a famous play, 1936, called "Waiting for Lefty," about unions in America. It was a huge hit. Um, then he started directing plays, and he got to direct some of the most important plays of any century, but the 20th century for sure. He got to direct Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, who direct, Death of a Salesman, Streetcar Named Desire, to name a couple. Then he finally got a chance to direct movies. His first movie won Academy Award, Three Girls in Brooklyn. He felt he didn't deserve it. He goes, nobody should get an Academy Award in the first movie. It's not good. I'm just barely learning the craft. He later on made a major movie star in Marlon Brando. Remember The Paper You're Supposed to Write? He directed that movie, On the Waterfront. He also directed Streetcar Named Desire with Brando and another Brando movie called Viva Zapata about the Mexican Revolutionary. And yes, Brando does a great job. No, he's not Mexican, folks. He's born, I think, Nebraska, and but he played Zapata in that one. Kazan had a way with actors like no other director. He directed some of those powerful actors in America of the 20th century, and from James Dean in East of Eden to Montgomery Clift in The Wild River, and Warren Beatty later on, Splendid in the Grass, and the actresses he directed were Eva St. Marie, drawing a blank right now, Natalie Wood, and he worked with them so close because he was known as a an actor's director. He really concentrated on their performances. Montgomery Clift, James Dean, Marlon Brando, need I say more? They changed the face of acting through his movies. Without Kazan, there would be no movies. Now, I showed you, hopefully you guys watched the documentary on House Un-American Activities. Kazan did come in there and he testified and he named names. And so his career continued. And a lot of people felt he sold his friends out, which technically he did. Brando wrote him a letter after he'd done the play Streetcar Named Desire, and after he'd done Zapata with him, he said, I'm ashamed to call you my friend. I will never work with you again. Do not contact me. Well, after Buck Shulberg wrote the great script for On the Waterfront, Kazan knew only one person should play that part, and of Terry Malloy, and he sent the script out to Brando, and Brando, of course, read it and changed his mind about not contacting his friend again, and he did the movie because he saw a good script when he saw it, and so all was forgiven for a while, and Brando won the Academy Award for it. So Brando had his ideals, and he tried to take a stand. It didn't work because he knew a good thing when he saw it. So it's a complicated relationship he had after he gave names. He didn't work too much in the 60s. He directed a couple of movies. There's Just Okay, The Last Tycoon with Robert De Niro. But he turned to novels. He became a novelist because he essentially was at his steps with the times. But, hopefully you saw that documentary I showed you. He won Academy Award already a couple times, but they gave him another honorary one, and a lot of people didn't want to stand up. I told you this last week when I talked about House Un-American Activities. Kazan had a real definitive look to his films. Some of them were in black and white, some were in color, but you could always kind of tell what they are. He knew how to get that camera to show what you needed to see, in a very economical way, and the performers, he knew how to direct. He knew how to direct actors and knew how to manipulate them to give the performances of their lifetime. The third tour was Billy Wilder, who was fled Nazi Germany. He was a Jew, and he knew his days were numbered if he stayed there. And so he came to this country and started writing screenplays, and it was kind of successful early on. But in his directing, he usually directed hard-boiled films with a cynical outlook. That's what he was accused of. I like his outlook because I guess maybe I'm cynical too, meaning he doesn't trust humanity, and so he doesn't show it in a very good way. I don't trust it either, folks. And so his films in the 1950s were some of the most incredible cinema in the history of cinema. Sunset Boulevard, Sabrina's not one of my favorites. Stalag 17, fantastic World War II film. Sunset Boulevard, a great film about Hollywood screenwriter who sells his soul to a wealthy woman. And so many, Ace in the Hole, cynical about a reporter who's milking a story about a man trapped in a cave. And believe it or not, anyway, with Kirk Douglas, and he directed probably my favorite all-time Billy Wilder film, The Apartment, with Jack Lemmon, I'm sorry, and a wonderful film. Anyway, he had a style that was considered cynical, but he worked with the same screenwriter, so he and the screenwriter wrote these incredible, smart, whip-smart, complicated screenplays. And then he used a lot of times the same cinematographers, so they had a look about them. And his stamp is on these things. And they are all rather successful. He directed movies into the 60s. Fortune Cookie, not one of my favorites. And then later on, he became like a teacher. And he was always writing scripts. He went to work every day to until on scripts. And he lived since the 1990s. In his 80s, he was pretty old. And he's still dreaming about films. Still trying to direct his next film. Billy Wilder, another brilliant auteur that really thrived in this conservative time of the 1950s in America. And we got the Cold War going on with Russia, Soviet Union. We've got the conservative in the White House, Eisenhower. We've got civil unrest. African Americans were not getting their civil rights. They weren't. We had Jim Crow laws in some states. Women were still kind of second-class citizens. But the art was thriving. The music was thriving with jazz and rock and roll. Painters were thriving with Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol and the rest. Authors were thriving, from Norman Mailer to Joseph Heller, Kurt Vonnegut, just to name a few, Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, some of the best writing of the 20th century, absolutely. Mid-20th century, in conservative times, I've told you this before in the other lectures, that arts thrive in a conservative environment. Meaning when things are shut down and it seems like we go in, artists go inward and they express their rage through their art. And that's a good thing. The auteurs, the auteur theory. I'm going to post some stuff on Canvas, probably a little documentary on each of these guys if I can find them. A little documentary on auteur theory, so you'll know what the hell you're talking about when you're writing. It'll make you sound really intelligent if you throw the word auteur in there sometimes. Anyway, I haven't even started. I just barely started your Citizen Kane papers. I'm working on it. What else? Keep up the good work, guys. Keep looking at your book, How to Write About Movies. You'll get better. I'm not going to assign an essay this week, I don't believe, because didn't I just assign one already that's due this week? So I'm not going to do another one. That gives me a chance to catch up. That's it. Hope you're staying healthy. The weather's turned nicer. The wind and the rain, a little bit of rain we had, cooler temperatures. That's why I was out on my bike today. Could breathe without dying of an asthma attack and the smoke. Things are looking up. I hope you guys are surviving all this. Hope you're wearing your mask and staying safe. And keep watching movies because everything is cinema.